Well, Adam, thank you for joining me.
Hey, Matt, thanks so much.
Yeah, I'm glad you could join me. So why don't we just start out? You can tell me a little bit about your business, Crowds on Demand.
Largest protest company in the country, been around 13 to 14 years, started in 2012, specializes in PR stunts, in advocacy campaigns, um, demonstrations, audience events, anything to bring publicity, attention, and effectiveness to a cause, a movement, a campaign, a company, whatever.
Very interesting. So I have a bunch of questions for you. I'm very interested to talk to you today, and I'm glad you're here. So I'm curious if you have always had an entrepreneurial spirit and if you started any businesses before Crowds on Demand or no.
Well, I was 21 when I started Crowds on Demand, so I know there are teen entrepreneurs, but I wasn't exactly one of them. I did work a lot of very, very random jobs throughout college, both on, political campaigns, which I suppose wouldn't be random, um, as a reporter, um, as a census taker, um, all kinds of as a sales representative, like all kinds of things really, which did give me some kind of insight. Anyone who starts a business at 21 obviously doesn't have an immense amount of experience, but you still kind of have some basis of knowledge of like, okay, here's kind of how the world works. Um, and that it informs how I operate the business.
Gotcha. Okay. So what prompted you to do this particular line of work?
Well, the thing is that I saw any business has to be built on the basis of supply and demand, right? So I saw a demand for the idea of context behind an event, whether it's a product launch, right? Do you want to launch a product with no people in the audience, right? Do you want to have a campaign rally with no one in the audience? Do you want to have a um present at a conference and have it be kind of completely ineffective because people don't hear about it, right? Or can you set the right context to things, right? So I saw there's a real demand of doing that. And especially on the political side, there's an increased kind of apathy, right? Of people don't really want to go out to things. And part of that is because so much is online and increasingly online since I started the business. So a lot of people are just kind of like, oh, why do I need to go out to do something in person when I can participate online with far more ease, right? So we're like, hey, how do we actually turn people out to these type of things, right? And number two, living in LA, right? I like to say LA and New York actors have the original gig economy, right? Before the gig economy was a term, actors in New York and LA have been working gig work, right? That is to say, they'll work random jobs when they're not acting to pay the bills, right? Um,
Right.
so I kind of got to thinking, well, what if I connect these actors in LA, New York, whatever, with these types of events? So instead of working as a valet or waiter where you're not even using your acting skills, here we get to put your acting skills to work, right? Now, it's interesting because we'll do like PR events with actors now, but we generally don't use actors for political events unless they otherwise like care about the cause. So this whole idea of hiring actors has kind of come back to haunt me a little bit, because when the media will regularly like kind of present it as like, oh, he hires actors to go to protests, which isn't 100% strictly speaking accurate. But it was accurate, when I started the business.
Yeah. Okay. So do you ask the actors first what their political persuasions are, or is that irrelevant to the cause?
Very relevant. It's the opposite of irrelevant. Because what I found is, number one, I only want to have people who are passionate about a cause, right? Because people who are not passionate about the cause are not going to do a very good job as brand ambassadors for a cause, right? As you can imagine. Um,
Right.
So, number one, they're not going to do a very good job. So, therefore, it's not going to advocate. Number two, there's a genuineness that I want to have where, hey, we're facilitating people's participation with their own views rather than paying people who are apathetic to express a view.
Do you think there's a genuineness in hiring actors because actors are known for not being themselves? Do you feel that that's genuine even though you're hiring specifically actors?
Well, I guess the way that I would characterize it is we're actually giving a lot of people the opportunity to participate who wouldn't otherwise participate, right? So who if people aren't getting paid, right? Retirees and students are overrepresented at protests, right? Why? Because the opportunity cost is lower for them to participate, right? Um a well-to-do retiree can go to as many protests as they want, right? They don't have childcare to worry about, you know. Whereas someone who works an hourly fast food job, like imagine taking time off. You've got to take unpaid time off, then arrange childcare, right? So
Right.
what we're doing is we actually facilitate just ordinary people participating in the process. And you know, we actually a lot of people don't realize this. We interview each participant individually before each event, even if you've done an event with us before, to make sure that you really believe in the cause.
What are the criteria that you have in the business to reject? I mean, do you reject somebody if they aren't for the cause and they're just there for the money?
100%. Yeah, 100%. So a few reasons that we like to bring people in, right? No, so we want to make sure that they're passionate about the cause. If possible, we want to make sure or we want to we would like for them to have personal experience with a cause, right? So for some reason the cause that we're dealing with, like let's just say this is an issue of insurance companies hiking the price of prescription drugs, right? And making it harder to get coverage. Well, maybe someone who's had that experience personally in their life would make for an effective advocate because when you're demonstrating it would be helpful to have people who have that personal knowledge to speak to passersby and to the media, right? So
Right.
that personal experience helps. Number one criteria though is we are a peaceful, lawful company. So it's important to note that we don't want anyone who's not committed to the idea of peaceful, respectful, lawful advocacy. So if you're coming in and you're passionate, but you don't seem to share that value, we don't want to be associated with you, right? And it's not to your benefit to associate with us anyway because you want to like we want to do activism a certain way, right? Which is, and I've been an outspoken advocate of this, is blocking roads without a permit does not work. You know what I mean? Screaming expletives in people's face, storming into a restaurant, storming into church, whatever. It doesn't work. Like, let's even take the legal, ethical side aside because I know that's at least ethical stuff is subjective. It's just not effective.
Do you have a system in place to deal with bad actors? And have you had any bad actors in the past that have come with, bricks to throw through windows or something along those lines?
Never. Well, so never, and that honestly, I don't even get the credit for that. That's my team who vets these people gets the credit. We've been around for, like I said, 13, almost 14 years, and we've never had any kind of problem. Now, we've had people who are not enthusiastic. We've had people who, imagine any job, right? Any type of job. You had a bad Uber Eats driver? Like I think we all probably have, right? But at the end of the day, we've never had someone who's created any kind of incident like that, never had anyone arrested, never ever. And because uh, so I kind of went through one aspect, which is that we are careful about who we hire. But number two is we know the law, right? We're aware of what our rights are. And I always say establish good relationships with the local police, right? And it's not about being subservient to the police. It's actually about reminding the police that their obligation is actually to facilitate First Amendment expression, right? So I'm not saying you do. I'm saying you go in to deal with the police with the a huge amount of respect and saying, but if the police say, oh, like, and this has happened to us before, oh, can you move to the other side of the road? Can you move a block down the street? The answer sometimes is no, actually, we don't have to do that. Respectfully, we're in our rights to be here. And then if you come in with the principle of, we know our rights, but we're not like we're treating you with the respect that you deserve as an officer, right? I feel like that has generally proven extremely productive.
Yeah. So do you have crowds on demand representatives on site at all the protests to sort of manage
A
things so they
hundred
don't get out
percent.
of hand? Yeah.
Yes,
Okay.
exactly, exactly. We always do that, and we always like to have people who are well spoken, who can negotiate those sorts of things
And do you work in multiple cities across the country?
across
You
every
do, right?
every
And
city.
so do you have a pool of actors that you draw from those cities? Like, where are you getting these people from?
Well, the answer is kind of all of the above. We have a lot of people we know, a lot of people that we know and we can reach out to, and we're always also kind of recruiting. We have It's nice to have like a long list of people, So okay, this guy is an environmental activist in Cleveland, right? This lady is pro police advocate in you know Portland, Maine, right? Like, yeah, it's great to have that. I mean, there are people that we probably have in our network that we don't really call upon very often or at all. And there are probably people that we call upon a lot. So it just depends.
Yeah. So what do you say to your critics that say that this is disingenuous, that this is, sort of false advertising because you're hiring actors to come and protest, and you say that they are on board with the protest, but they may or may not be. They just might be there for the money. What do you say to those people that are your critics?
Well, let me give you like 10 responses to my critics. I
Okay.
have a few. I've thought about this a lot. Okay. So, number one, my critics are hypocritical. Many of them make money commentating, right? Commenting and getting paid. And they're saying, oh, well, like, well, I'm getting paid sometimes millions of dollars to comment on stories, right? And they want their subscribers or listeners to believe that they're 100% genuine, despite the fact that they have a boss or they have advertisers and sponsors, but they're totally genuine. And then someone who works for me who gets a couple $100 is somehow not genuine. So, first of all, there's sort of the hypocritical and classism issue inherent in those critiques, right? Number two,
Can I push back for a second just
yeah,
before you dive in?
yeah,
I just want to say that the commentators, from my perspective, the commentators, everybody generally knows that this is that person's opinion. Everybody sort of knows that they have sponsors and they're in it for the money, and there's sort of a transparency in that. And I feel like the criticism for your business might be from other people that perhaps you're not advertising that all of the people are actors. Is that
Well
accurate?
okay, so let's go into it. It's actually a very good point. Well, number 1, I don't know how much every commentator is getting paid and by whom and what those bosses or sponsors are telling them to say, right? So if I'm listening, and I'm not gonna call out anyone in particular, but, like, I mean, just hypothetically speaking, like, Joe Rogan, like, he has sponsors, he has a deal with his streaming service, right? I have no idea. I know he's getting paid oodles of money, right? I don't know whether they're telling him what to say or whether they're implicitly telling him what to say, right? I don't know what is going on behind the scenes with Joe Rogan and whether there are certain things that he is saying or certain topics he won't talk about because of the sponsors, whether implicitly or explicitly stated. So if you're saying, oh, well, we know, like, no, we don't know. And in fact, these people tend to insist very adamantly when pressured, when pushed on it, that what you're hearing is their genuine views, and yet I think that uh, that may or may not be the case in all instances. But we're talking about millions of dollars, right? Most people would make some compromise for millions of dollars, right? I mean, anyone who works for corporate America to some extent is making a compromise to earn a salary, right? Because we don't agree with everything our company says or does, right? And but they're paying us a salary, so at least on the company's time and the company's dime, we're gonna float the company's line, right? So the I didn't mean to rhyme that, but there you go. Um,
Well done. Well done.
but but the at the end of the day, so we don't know that really, but But, then the second part is, um, of my 10-part response that, um, is that there are a lot of people who attend protests, and we don't always understand anyone's real motivations, right? Nor in a free thought country, right? Should we have to, right? So if you're going to a protest because you're trying to impress a girl to get laid, right? Should you have to disclose the fact that you don't really care that much about the protests, right? But you're there to meet a girl and get laid, right? Like, is that something that should be disclosed? Because the concept of saying, oh, well, people who are getting paid should disclose is what? It's the concept that, well, it's an ulterior motive that is distracting from the fact that they might not genuinely be interested in the cause. So therefore, if you extrapolate that argument, anyone who has any reason other than genuine support or opposition to a cause should disclose that. That's, I guess, my, if you actually take that to the logical endpoint, right?
Well, are you comparing your business that's a for-profit company to an individual that's trying to get laid? Do you think that there's a correlation there, or do you think that's a fair
Well,
comparison?
what I'm saying is that people have all kinds of incentives to go to things, right? Maybe my
Sure, sure.
friend asked me to go to something. Maybe, like, have you ever been to an event that you're not super thrilled to be at because someone asked you to go to, right? Like, I
Well,
tried
I
it
hear you,
now.
yes.
I'm almost in my, I'm in my mid-30s now, so I'm a little old to do that, but, like, certainly
Same.
in my 20s, I went to a lot of things that I didn't wanna go to because people asked me to go and I wanted to be nice, you know? So, okay, so that's, I mean, now we're going into sort of Larry David, Curb Your Enthusiasm, questions, but at the end of the day, um, let's even go into like labor unions, for example. Labor unions, and I know a lot of union members who tell me that they are incentivized to go to rallies or to protests or to events for candidates that they may or may not support, right? So number one, it's a candidate that they may not even support, and number two, it might be a candidate that they would have supported, but they wouldn't have gone out to the event, right? So either
Sure.
way, right? But if you go to these union events, you're going to get a good shift. If you don't go to the union events, you're not going to get a good shift. So that's what's called incentivized activism. So I'm kind of trying to coin this term, incentivized activism, because it's kind of paid protesting sort of implies, okay, you're being paid off, as opposed to, okay, a lot of us have incentives. Okay, so we've gone over labor unions. Number two, political staffers. So would you be surprised to know, maybe you wouldn't, that there are 15,000 paid political staffers in Washington, D.C. on Capitol Hill? So that's Republicans and Democrats. So let's just say
Sure.
you see Ocasio Cortez or Ted Cruz or whatever giving some sort of speech somewhere in Washington, and you see people behind them and listening to them, those people might well work for the Republican or Democratic Party and might be sort of told, oh, you should be going out to this thing, right? So that's also incentivized activism, right? Um, I mean, then we can go to the social component of influencers, right? So
Well, can I jump in real quick?
yeah, of course.
Speaking about incentivized protesting, and they're there for perhaps an ulterior motive to
Yeah,
promote their boss or their party or whatever. There's sort of a well documented over the last 50 years cases of the FBI being involved in various protests, whether they're just
yeah,
observing the protest or actively participating in the protest themselves in
yeah,
some sort of way, shape, or form.
yeah.
And so I'm curious if the FBI or any of the other governmental institutions come to you as a client and try to get on board with crowds on demand to participate in the protests in that sort of way.
You know, I I I don't. I think that some of that might be overstated. The other thing is, if they are doing that, yeah, we might not even know about it. Like, they might. I mean, just I'm just answering this hypothetically, that if I were them, I would probably use one of the many shell company, a like a some sort of alias to do whatever it is. But I honestly don't. I really don't know. I mean, I've offered my help. Actually, to the government, to Congress, in terms of tracking down some of the people who might be involved in violent activism, right? Because I feel that that is a threat to the country, and that that actually like spits on peaceful persuasive activism. So I've actually even like made an offer to the Congress to help with that, and thus far they haven't been that interested. So
Hmm.
I really don't know, and I don't think I can give an informed answer to that question.
Sure, and it's not necessarily hypothetical, and I'm no expert on the topic. I just did a little brief look into it, and there has been well documented cases of it. That's why I'm asking: has the FBI or any of these members of the government approached you and your company, or is it mostly you just reaching out to them?
Well, let me also just say one other kind of point, sort of in that sort of responds to that, which is that I don't like the idea of the government involving itself in any form of peaceful protest group, right? Now, I
Really?
understand that the government is wanting to monitor certain things that they think could turn violent, but the question that I have, so I'm just going to make more of like a broad point on this, is
Okay.
the idea that where does looking for bad actions then turn into what's called sort of alleged entrapment, right? So this happened under the Bush administration with Muslims. This happened under the Biden administration with conservatives, right? Where you have the law enforcement and they find people, generally kind of low IQ people, and who might be involved in, Muslim Brotherhood or Proud Boys or whatever, right? And maybe expressing some controversial opinions, as is their right to do, right, in the United States. But then they have some undercover person who kind of pushes them to get more radical and then do something illegal, right? And then they are arrested for that illegal activity that would never have happened had the undercover person not pushed them. So I will say, as a First Amendment advocate, I really don't support that at all. I totally understand, like, hey, have confidential people in there to monitor what's going on, but um if you want, right, to the extent that you can, that's lawful, right? And I'm not an expert at that, but I don't support the idea of them pushing things along like that. So, but knowingly, that stuff has never happened to us.
So you see a difference between the FBI putting an agent or agents into a protest to shape the dialogue around the protest versus you hiring actors to appear that the protest is larger than it might be if you hadn't hired the actors. You see a difference in shaping the protest between the FBI and your company?
Well, I mean, first of all, there are a couple of things to that. I like to think of, I'm a publicist. I'm a publicity guy. My job is to put any movement or company in the best possible context, right? It's why you shave or you groom in the morning. It's why you brush your hair. It's why you put on clothes, right? You want to put yourself in a good context, right? Like, let's just look at it from the basics up, right? Like, we do, even those of us who don't do a lot for ourselves, do various things to put ourselves in a better context. We don't show up to work naked, right? Why? Because that wouldn't be not only because that, I guess that's illegal, but we want to put ourselves in the right context. We don't show up, hopefully, in Crocs and, cargo shorts to our office, right? Why?
Right.
Because you're not putting yourself in the right context. So what I'm saying is, when by providing the people, I'm not making it look bigger. I'm putting it in the right context where people will actually pay attention. And if they agree with the cause, they will engage with the cause. A lot of amazing causes, and I've found this because there are people who have contacted us who, for whatever reason, have not been able to afford to engage our services, but some of them have amazing causes. And those causes had, if they had more attention, would probably grow, but they have never been able to catalyze, so therefore they've never been able to grow.
Okay, so I guess I want to know what you think the purpose of crowds on demand is. If it's not to appear to be larger or appear to show a greater cause to the topic at hand, what is the purpose of crowds on demand then?
It's to raise awareness. It's the same reason you purchase an advertisement, right? It's a way to raise awareness in a targeted, effective, loud manner, So why do you buy an ad for the Super Bowl, right? It's you buy it because you want 100 million people to see that ad, right? And in the hopes that people, upon seeing that ad, will engage with your product or whatever, right?
Sure.
So, what protest does, and let me give you two examples of where um money and all that doesn't really like what protest does is it makes sure people listen. If you have a crap cause, it's not going to grow. Great examples of causes that sort of started with, a lot of funding but grew, the Tea Party, right? Had started with a lot of funding, great publicity, people, right? But it grew because it resonated with people, right? Whereas look at Michael Bloomberg or Jeb Bush, right? Like they put tons of money, tons of ads, tons of everything, and they totally flopped in their respective presidential campaigns. It's not because people didn't know who they were, it's because their message didn't resonate. So, money and the ability to protest helps get your message out there, but it has to be a good message. The other kind of thing that people the misnomer is that we're some sort of tool of big interests. We're absolutely not. We're a tool of smaller interests, of startup companies, of mid-sized ventures, of cryptocurrencies, of advocacy groups. That are fighting often against monopolistic enterprises. Why? Because if you own half of Congress, you don't have to protest, right? You already write the laws. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah,
It's
right.
the oppositional interests that have to protest to get their cause across. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, but if there's already a good cause and there's already a protest in place in a particular city, and it only has a small crowd, whatever that means, 200 people or something, why do they need crowds on demand to have an extra 4 or 500 people to magnify that? If it's already a good
Well,
cause, why do they
that's
need you?
not always what we do, by the way. A lot of times it's a cause that, first of all, getting 200 people to an event is not an easy feat, believe me. So you're like talking about 200 like it's easy, but
Okay.
what oftentimes we'll do is like, okay, let's just say it is a good cause and you have the 200. What I would actually probably tell them is, don't hire us for 400 people on the day of. Hire us to have 10 people outside the city council offices or the whatever the relevant offices is every single effing day for the next year, and
Mhm.
put those resources to better use, because then you can essentially make sure that people don't forget about the cause. So yeah, let's just say you have I mean, in order to get 200 people out, you need to have something at least somewhat compelling, right? Well, okay, you
Right.
have that, but you're not going to get 200 people out every single day. So what happens is, because one of the things is I advise companies on how to respond to protests as well, right? What is my number one rule of how to respond? Ignore, right? Because it'll go away and they'll move on, right? So if you have to create something that they can't ignore, right? And what we do is often actually create things that are more sustained, more strategic. I like to focus on, also the other reason to hire crowds on demand is we know strategy, right? Like a lot of people are wasting their time. They're protesting. Let's just say you're a liberal group. You're like, oh, I really want to protest Trump. Well, who am I going to protest? I'm going to protest the Portland City Council. It's like, well, I don't think there are any MAGA people on the Portland City Council. You know what I mean? Like, so
Right, right.
what are you doing? Right? Like, what are the so people have to be strategic and in figuring out what is it you're opposing, number one, and how do I persuade? What am I opposing? What do I want? Who can help give me what I want? And what are the things that I can use to push those people to give me what I want?
Gotcha.
Um, and actually, let me give you your listeners some free advice, because I feel like this is important. And I'm actually writing a book about this because it's something that uh, not all of us are going to be dealing with, hopefully, with political matters in our lives, but almost all of us are going to deal with something in our lives where we have to advocate for ourselves. Maybe your insurance company won't cover a important treatment. Maybe you're behind on your rent and you want to negotiate with your landlord and figure out how to stay in your home, right? So listen to these tips in terms of how to deal with that, right? Because this is people need to learn how to advocate for themselves, right? Number one, figure out who has the power to actually help you, right? So let's just say you're behind on your rent, and but you it might not be the property manager who can actually give you that extension of time to pay. They may not have the ability to do that because there's some multinational company over them. So who, maybe it's the regional manager, maybe it's the statewide manager, figure out who actually has that power. And then, okay, well, why would they give that to you? Right. Like, and understanding what, if any, leverage you have in the situation. Okay. Maybe the leverage is, well, I just got a new job. I'm going to get my first paycheck in 3 weeks. Versus if you evict me, I can make this really painful process for you and make you spend $50,000 on an attorney to get me out. Right. So on the one hand, I'm going to try to get current within the next couple months. And on the other hand, I can make it really expensive for you. Right. So that's a way that ordinary people can advocate for themselves, right? And say, okay, but you may not be able to have that discussion with your property manager. You may have to escalate that to a regional leader who can actually have that discussion and who might understand the nuance of those points, right? So it's important to me that to teach people how to out to be their own best advocates, right? Because but part of what we do as a company is we try to figure out how to do advocacy campaigns as strategically as possible because that maximizes effectiveness for the client and reduces budget.
Gotcha. Um, so I'm of the personal opinion of I have opinions about protests, and I see all these protests that often, from my perspective, lead to nothing, make no
Yes.
real change, don't change
Yeah.
legislation, etc. So you're in the business. I'm sure you'll have a different answer than me, but I'm curious if you think that protests actually cause change, real action. Have you seen in the business where the protests have actually led to something actually changing?
Well, it's a great question, and you are right, and that was kind of exactly what I was trying to get across with my last answer, which is you have to be strategic. So, least successful movement of all time in my lifetime was Occupy Wall Street, right? How do I measure success or lack thereof? Is the number of people involved to goals achieved, right? Occupy Wall Street achieved zero. Not a single one of those executives was imprisoned. Wall Street is more powerful than ever today, right? Basically nothing was done despite the fact that there was this giant recession and you had a democratic supermajority, which in theory would be people who were more skeptical of the big fat cat Wall Street guys, right? So why was that ineffective, right? Well, so let's first talk about why that was ineffective, right? Well, they had no leadership, which there's a nice thing about this, which is leadership tends to involve corruption, and that's bad, right? But look at BLM, right? But on the problematic side is that leadership, no lack of leadership means lack of cohesive ideas. So there was the worst thing you can do is allow people to say the right thing but not do anything. So a lot of politicians on both sides said, "Oh yeah, we love Occupy. Oh, we love what you're doing. Wall Street's bad." But without pushing them on specifics, you allowed them to get away with lip service, right? So what they needed to do is write out 10 goals and basically say, of these 10 goals, we need at least 5 of them, right? And we're going to push these people specifically and say, you, Senator, whatever, what have you done on this? You, Congressman, what have you done? President Obama, he was the president at the time. What are you going to do about this? Right.
Mhm.
And they failed to articulate specific ideas and to focus on specifics. It was just like a bunch of hippies out there in the tents being like, Wall Street's bad, and it just it lacked the specificity. So I like to say that my style is the opposite of Occupy Wall Street. I like to be really specific and say, um, this is what we want, and this is who we want it from, and the more we know about process and procedure, the more we can really hold people accountable. Like, oh, okay, this senator's like, oh, well, I tried, but my colleagues won't get behind it. Well, it's like, no, actually, that's bullshit. And here's why. right? And we're going to keep protesting until you do the right thing, right? We're going to keep calling your office until you do the right thing. But don't let them off the hook, because politicians, a good politician is really good at making it seem like they're doing the right thing, but they're not. You see what I'm saying?
Of
So
course.
I like to really be specific. And by the way, that's another piece of advice to your listeners. If you're in a bind and you see someone who's like a really good talker who says a lot of good things, hold them accountable for what are they gonna do, right? Not what are they gonna say, right?
Right.
Um,
Right.
so I've seen extremely effective movements from, delete Facebook, which we've done, for taking on big pharma and big insurance over certain prescription drug issues, right? Multi-billion dollar mergers. But the key thing in all of this is to be really specific with what you want, and be specific and understand hierarchy and understand who's in a position to do it. Because if you don't know that, you could be wasting your resources on the wrong person or people.
Right. So using those strategies and tactics, can you list a specific protest that actually got done whatever they were trying to get done, like big pharma, for example, or something like that?
Yeah, so it's a great example. So we were brought in because there was this is sort of, I guess, a somewhat LGBT related issue where there's a drug called Truvada, which is a anti HIV, like a HIV prevention drug that is commonly used in the LGBT community more often, right? And insurance companies were denying life insurance policies to people who were on this particular drug, which was bizarre because this is a drug that's actually supposed to reduce disease, not increase disease. But it was a back door to essentially discriminating against LGBT people, right? That was fairly obvious, right? So what we did, obviously I can't go into the client side of things, right? But what we did was we said, okay, well, these insurance, the any Democratic insurance commissioner or any insurance commissioner of any either party that says that they're anti-discrimination should find this really deeply concerning. So we found out, we first identified the insurance commissioners that had spoken the most about LGBT issues. So because it helps to be able to hold people accountable for their own words. Then we started calling and arranging meetings with their offices. And the ones that weren't immediately agreeing to meet with us, we started protesting, right? We started really going at them, respectfully, but with a lot of noise to say, hey, you're anti LGBT, right? Because if you're not
Hmm.
taking on anti LGBT discrimination, then you're actually part of the problem. And we're not going to let you say you're pro LGBT if you're not going to do that, right? Um,
Right.
so it actually worked. It only took us like maybe 3-4 weeks before the what happened was, because I knew all you need to do is get California and New York on board, because those are obviously like big influential states. And then by the time once you do that, these insurance companies are going to stop, right? So
Right.
because then they know it's going to grow from there, and they don't want that those challenges, right? So they
Right.
resolve it really really quickly. But it's part of it is knowing who you go for. And you know I always say, and by the way, this was, people might associate this campaign with a liberal campaign, but we work with liberals and conservatives. And I've always found what's most effective is you hold liberals accountable to liberal values and conservatives accountable to conservative values. So if you're a conservative who's doing nothing about police getting defunded, who's doing nothing about unsafe streets, right? You should be held accountable. You're not a law and order conservative, right? So we're not going to
Right.
let you say that. So my thing is, hold people accountable to their stated values. If you're a woke liberal, you should be held accountable for those values, right? So
Mhm.
it's always effective to come right from right and left from left.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, well, I want to be respectful of your time, so I just have a final question, then we can wrap things up.
Yes.
I love talking to people about AI, and since you're sort of in the business of optics and perception on particular topics and things
Yeah.
like that, have you ever considered incorporating AI into the business to show a crowd that is AI and not actually there, just to post it on social media to gain awareness and not have actors, but use AI instead of actors?
Well, that would be misleading. And I it's not something that I would advocate doing. And I think once you start lying about that, it's a problem. And I think you're much better off just organizing the crowd. If you want to create social media buzz, there's a lot of ways to do that too. But I don't advocate doing that. There probably are ways to incorporate AI into our business, right? I don't know what those ways are yet, is the answer. But I will keep an eye out,
Yeah,
but
interesting.
not
I was just
through the way
curious.
that you mentioned.
Yeah, understood. Understood. Well, I've really enjoyed this conversation. Thanks for taking the time to join me today. Thank you.
Hey, Matt, I really appreciate this discussion. Thank you.